Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining me on the Slice of Construction podcast. I'm your host, Jared Taylor, and joining me today is the president and founder of FullStack Modular, Roger Krulak. Roger, how's it going?
Pretty good, Jared. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm excited for us to chat here today. Let's dive right in. We tend to keep these short and sweet. First question, it's my go-to. You're walking down the street, someone runs into you, you tell them what you do, they say, "What is FullStack Modular?" What do you tell them?
So yeah, FullStack Modular is a design, manufacture, construct solution for fully volumetric modular buildings, mostly focused on three verticals: hotels, student housing, and multifamily. Affordable to attainable to market.
What was it about those three areas that you wanted to focus in on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more what our product is well suited for. So one of the limitations of a volumetric modular solution like we provide is transportation. And so in order to the maximum transportation width across the road for sure is 16 feet or under, and and less than 58 feet long. So if you look at those parameters and what has sort of those repetitions, multifamily is something that matches that pretty easily.
And I know you've been running this company now for almost a decade, right? Which, by the way, kudos to you. Not many people can have a business that lasts almost a decade, so that speaks to what you've built here. Let's talk a little bit about. I know everyone listening, we always like to focus on the good, but people also like to hear about those early challenges and maybe how you overcame them. So when you're building this over the last 9 years almost, uh, what were some of the early challenges that you ran into, and then how did you get past those?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I ask myself pretty much every night. But but the fact is that one of the interesting things about trying to take an industrialized process in industrialized construction, for example, and move it into an industry that doesn't really adapt it so well or hasn't adapted it so well over time, industrialized construction or industrialization as a whole requires constant feed and some similarity in product in order to take advantage of economies of scale. The development world is exactly the opposite. It is lumpy. It wants to think that everything is different, even though it's really not. And so the challenge is how do you meet the needs of the customers, in our case, at least on the start, developers, to the needs of the factory. And that is the biggest challenge. And I think not the only reason, but most of the reason that companies in our space have failed. Um, Adoption is another one, and but the lumpiness is a problem. I mean, factories want the same thing flowing through the factory every day. That's how you cover your overhead. That's how you decrease your cost. That's how you increase your labor productivity. Um, so that is a challenge, and it is a challenge that all the companies that are still around are facing in some fashion, and often has to do with being part of the development process or part of the development team, which is something FullStack Modular is engaged in pivoting towards at this point.
Super interesting. I mean, what advice would you give to the early stage entrepreneur that's doesn't have to be the same space as you, but that wants to get into the construction space? I mean, you've obviously learned a lot of lessons here. If you had to just give them a couple pieces of advice, what would that look like?
The first thing I would make sure you understand is who is your customer and what do they define as their hierarchy of needs? Sort of the Maslow's ladder of hierarchy of needs of your customer. Like, what is it that they really want? And you may have the greatest whiz bang product in the world. If it doesn't either meet a need that is defined by your customer, you should rethink it and make sure that it does, because otherwise could be the coolest thing ever, but it's not going to make any difference to the customer, and as a result, your market's going to be very small. That's the first thing I would look at. And then, of course, I think every entrepreneur would tell you have as much runway as you possibly can, because you're going to make mistakes. And if you're planning on everything going right, then you're planning on failing.
If It's hopefully anyone that wants to be an entrepreneur out there, like we all like tend to be entrepreneurs tend to be just serial optimists, right? You
Yeah,
actually kind of have to be too, or you know, I have family members that always ask me anything about entrepreneurship. I'm like, it's literally you're getting beat up every single day, and at some point you begin to like it. You get used to it, right? Uh,
I'm not there yet, but I understand exactly what you're
but
saying.
it's well, you know how it is, like especially
Yeah,
and then it kind of shifts. You have all this like when you have all these good things start happening, you start to think, I hope it keeps going, but there's always something like no one's streak is this long in this game. So super interesting. I would love going back to modular construction. I'm really curious, and you might not have an answer to this, but I would love to hear. Like, what are some common myths? Like, bust some myths for us. That's almost a word I can barely say. I don't know why.
sure.
I'm not gonna say it again just in case. But talk us through some of those that you've seen and kind of bust those for us.
Sure. I mean, the first thing I think that's super important is the definition of modular. Modular is a horribly ill-defined word, right? Because all kinds of things can be modular. You can have modular, you know, precast concrete system, modular curtain wall systems, you know, paneled walls. You could have a whole combination of those things. So one of the things that's a problem is modular doesn't really mean anything, and it's super important to define what you're talking about. So that's the first thing that needs to be busted. So we do fully volumetric modular construction, or the Singaporeans call it pre-finished, prefabricated volumetric construction. That's what we do. And then once you define that, unlike standard construction methodologies, there really isn't a basis of expectations related to that CSI division as it relates to prefabricated prefill. So how do you compare apples to apples? How do you level those bids? Super complicated. So that's the first myth. Like, get over that, because if you don't get over that, you're really never going to understand it. The second thing I think that's a huge myth is that if you take the same building with the same design uh, and the same process, and then just wave a modular magic wand, all of a sudden it's 20% cheaper and faster. It doesn't work that way. It's a process. It's got to be a design build process. All the stakeholders have to be engaged in it, because otherwise you're doing the same thing, right? You're putting a label on it, like, some certification, but it doesn't really. It can, but it requires everybody to be focused on a design build process that is using design build plus industrialized construction. So that's another myth. And I think the third myth, which I don't think should be first, but many do, is quality. I mean, we're building in a factory, high tolerances beyond what construction can achieve conventionally at all. The finishes are done in an enclosed and protected environment. It should be better quality. And it often is way better quality. Everything's plumb and square. It's all done. The level of finish is high. So that's the third sort of myth I'd like to bust today. And I guess I could probably come up with 300 more, but those are three good
Those were great ones. Um, Taking it from that to back to advice, I would love to hear, if this is kind of a different way of wording it, what's the worst piece of advice you've ever received?
Oh man. I think I don't even know what the word. I mean, I got so much bad advice. It happens every day. Like everybody will I always think about, and this is dating myself, but I always think about the Graduate, the movie The Graduate, was like, he asks, the guy's going to the party and he says, "What's your plastics?" The guy says, "Plastics, get into plastic." And I mean, I get all those all the time. Like, why don't you, or somebody calls me up and they see that I do modular. They're like, "Oh, we have like 4,000, you know, I don't know, like floating, steel, oil things, and they're modular. So why can't you build them?" I mean, to think that we can sort of do anything regardless of it once you put the label of modular, I think that's pretty bad advice. Mostly, I think it's less than bad advice is promises. Like the development world is like, "Oh, we have millions and millions of square feet. Just prove to me that you can save us 50%." But and call me when you can show me. I think it's more of that than it is sort of bad advice. Um, I, you know,
I mean, I think that's why it's so important to have like all of us to have our own filter of everyone's going to have an opinion on something that we end up doing, right? No matter what it is in life. And it's funny, a lot of times the advice comes from people that they don't have to execute on the advice. So they give you the advice thinking, "Oh yeah, sure, you can make that work," right? Um and that was probably the biggest thing I've learned along the way is, you still be nice, like you take that advice, but it's the ability to say no to a lot more. I didn't kind of figure that out early on in my career, and I think it's just so important to know what to say no to because honestly, the times saying no have been even more important than the times I've said yes to certain things. Super interesting. What do you
yeah.
think the future like? Let's look out a little ways here. Let's look out. I don't want to say decade. Let's say 5 years. Um, what does the future of construction overall kind of look like through your lens?
Future of construction as a whole, or in my modular
Well,
space, or
let's start out with modular, and then if you have an additional opinion
sure,
on just overall construction,
sure.
we can go from there.
Yeah, I mean, look, modular is getting attention because we know that construction costs, or frankly, costs of everything, have gone up so significantly, and the housing need has far outstripped our capacity, and of course, the increased costs have slowed down capacity, and the need hasn't done anything but increase for reasons that we don't have time to talk about today. But so that is so think about this: it's an endless market need with not enough solutions, and so as a result of that, I think you're going to see sort of growth in combined modular solutions, supplier, just like every other industrialized product has suppliers that understand the industrialized product of providing, for cars, seats and windshields and, engines and all that stuff. I mean, you're going to see some of that happening in the modular industry. You're also going to see consolidation because one of the interesting things about building a volumetric building, for instance, is somebody needs to put it in at the end of the day and install it on site. So having that streamlined, there's a big value proposition, but also a potential lack of value to the end user if it's not organized. So I think you'll see some more consolidation and collaboration and integration for sure. The construction industry has got to modernize, and it's modular is one of those things. There's 5,000 other things, but I mean, authority having jurisdiction. They need to use some AI. They need to find ways of getting permits through. They need to find a way to sort of, even though everyone uses international construction code or some version of it, like everybody's got a different version of it. Like that's just not accretive to any kind of construction. So I think we all have to reassess how we create the housing because we need it. I mean, this country doesn't have enough housing, and now we've built capacity for manufacturing that puts us on the stage to be one of the biggest manufacturers in the world for things that are needed, with no housing for those people that are going to work in the factories.
Like,
It's a problem.
Roger, let's talk a little bit too, though. The modular housing can
Yeah.
help a lot of this. What limitations still exist, though? Right? Like in terms of what you're doing, what's like the largest size property you can end up creating? It's not like you can do. I mean, and I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like, you can't do like a 20-story high rise, right? With mod, you can now.
We are we're a mid to high rise solution. So we're all steel, type 1 construction, and frankly, in a non-seismic or non-highly seismic, we can easily go 45 stories in a double loaded corridor. In a seismic condition, 24 to 28. In a high seismic, sort of California
What's your sweet
area.
spot then? Like what like for size properties? What's your sweet spot?
Yeah, we like to see about 120,000 feet ish in that range, plus minus 30% or so, and normally above what you can build in wood. So north of 8, under 20 is really sort of our sweet spot. And then depending on the seismic conditions, like it shifts a little bit. Like in seismic, it's more like 8 to 16, and in non-seismic, it's sort of 8 to 22. But that's really what we do.
So, do you think we'll continue to see, like, as things continue to innovate and progress, the size like that is possible for this modular construction? Do you think we'll continue to see that just surpass where things are at today, like even over the next 5-10 years, greatly, or is there a limit in your mind?
Well, I actually think it's sort of, and I apologize, but it's sort of the wrong question. The question is what's the value proposition?
Okay.
So, I could build in our system 1,000-foot tower. I mean, no problem. It will make no sense. It will not be a value proposition to the end user, other than to say that they built 1,000-foot tower. But modularly, there's no advantage to sort of 1,000-foot tower, and I don't have enough time to talk about that today. So the question is what's the value proposition, and where does it grow, and where is it needed? And I think I sort of described what needs to happen. Like dense urban environments are more sustainable. Obviously, housing people in more density is better for the earth. And we have these housing needs in areas that are very low on housing capacity and very high on need, and to the extent that we can fill those. And I think what we can do is we can increase the productivity at which we can deliver these things, which is the only way that I see you increasing productivity, other than somewhat printed houses and all the other things that are sort of technology focused to decrease labor costs and increase speed and rapidity.
100%. Huh. I like that. I like the switching it to the value prop too versus what I said. So I like that a lot. What's next for you and the company that you can share with us here today as we wrap up?
We are super excited. We are working very hard to provide a platform to develop modular buildings, mostly for the attainable and affordable space, but for many. And we are growing very rapidly in the student housing space. So we've developed a product for that, which is working quite well. And we are East and West Coast, and the collaborations that we're having with the building trades, which is unique for our business, is not only exciting, but we think very valuable in both directions, which is super exciting.
I'm excited for you, and I'm wishing you the best of luck. I'm excited to continue the conversation on future episodes, and let's definitely stay in touch. Let us know any updates that are happening. We'd love to learn more. And once again, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast here today.
Jared, honored. Thank you so much for the opportunity.